Alright, so today I just wanted to compare the US Model 1840 Cavalry Saber with the US Model 1860 Cavalry Saber. Now the sword that I'm using as a representative of the 1860 is technically a Model 1906. The only difference between the two models being that the 1906 has a steel guard and pommel, and the 1860 has a brass guard and pommel. So starting with the blades, the blade on the 1840 is usually 35 to 36 inches long, about 30 millimeters wide at the base, and the spine is, I would say, almost 1 centimeter thick there at the base, substantially thicker than on the 1860, although the entire blade itself is more substantial than on the 1860. And that probably accounts for most of the weight difference. The 1840 is quite a bit more heavy than the 1860. So the 1860, on the other hand, is usually about an inch shorter in the blade than the 1840. The spine is quite a bit more narrow, and it's also slightly rounded, whereas the spine on the 1840 is flat-backed. Probably won't even notice that in the video. It's very slight. And the width of the blade at the ricasso is usually about 1 inch. So the blade just overall is not as substantial as on the 1840. So moving on to the grips, or the hilts, the majority of the noticeable differences in these swords, I would say, are in the hilts. So you notice that from this profile, this outer bar on the guard on the 1840 wraps around the knuckles more completely than on the 1860, where you can see the, if I can get this right, there we go, you can see that the bars are more or less in line with one another, and they don't quite wrap, this outer one doesn't quite wrap around the knuckles like it does on the 1840. And moving on to the grips, the grip on the 1840, you can see that the wire wrapping runs all the way down the leather portion of the grip, all the way into the pommel cap here. And in comparison to the 1860, it's also much more densely wrapped. If we take a look at the 1860 now, the wire wrapping extends from the top of the grip just into the pommel cap and leaves this bottom portion just bare leather. You'll also notice, as I mentioned with the 1840, that on the 1860 the wire wrapping is not as dense. There's fewer actual wraps on the leather. The grip on the 1840 is also very slightly drooping downwards. You might not be able to tell that in this video, but it droops downwards very slightly. Whereas on the 1860, it's pretty straight as far as I can tell. And there's also this swollen portion at the middle of the grip on the 1860, which actually provides a pretty comfortable grip for your palm there in comparison to the 1840, in my opinion. So those are the main differences between the Model 1840 Cavalry Saber and the Model 1860 Cavalry Saber. It should be pointed out that within each model there is a fair amount of variation. So not everything that I mentioned here is going to be true 100% of the time. For example, on the 1860s, the ones made by Roby during the American Civil War, oftentimes the wire wrapping will extend all the way down the grip. But most of the time you're going to see a grip like this, where this bottom portion is left bare. So hopefully this video was of some interest or some use to someone out there. Thank you for watching. If it wasn't interesting, well, fuck it.